Welcome to the Inside Out Culture Podcast, where we look at insides of working culture and provide ideas, insights and actions for you to take on the outside. I'm Colin Ellis.
And I'm Kath Bishop. And in each episode, we'll examine a different question or a different organisation. And we'll use case studies, research and our own insights and experiences to help you change the way things get done in your world.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please like, subscribe and of course, let us know what you think. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Inside Out Culture Podcast. And as it's summer, as we're recording this in 2024, we are talking about what to look out for in a summer of sport. And there's plenty going on, Kath, at the minute.
My goodness, there is a lot. And actually, we have quite a few conversations off the mic. So in between some of the podcasts we've recorded, we've been discussing, oh, did you notice this coach? Did you see this happening in sport? And so we decided actually there's so much richness that we'd actually create an episode around the summer of sport. So we've got Wimbledon, we're in the middle of the Euros, and we've got the Olympics and the Paralympics coming up. Probably a few other things tucked in around the world as well. And what we wanted to do in this episode is sort of look behind what immediately gets shown on the TV to think about what else might we want to look out for? What can we learn? I'm always really avidly waiting for the interviews after events to kind of find out more about what's gone on inside a team. I'm often sort of looking for the bits around the edges that don't get reported as much to think about what's going on culturally. What are you looking forward to, or what are you kind of watching at the moment?
Oh my God, I'm the same. I'm a team dynamic nerd. I always find myself on WhatsApp groups, particularly with my brothers, kind of defending decisions that have been made. I know we're in the middle of the Euros. We'll talk about England's latest performance, which was pretty underwhelming yesterday. And, during the group stages, they weren't that great. And I would say it's about getting through. It's not about the best performance. It's about the performance you need to get through the group. And so I'm always looking for interviews, what people say. I'm looking at body language on the pitch, which is something I'm fascinated by. So anything related to culture and what it does is it enhances my enjoyment of the sport, unless I'm watching Everton and my football team, in which case nothing enhances the enjoyment of that. So I mean, let's start with England because. So if you're not familiar with it, we won't go into too much detail about particular results, but England, every tournament carry the weight of the nation on their shoulders. There's an expectation because they have good young players that they're going to win stuff. And they got through their group, but they really haven't played that well. But that's fine. Their job is to get out of the group. And then there was the first knockout game last night. So it was the last day of June. And they were pretty poor. And then they equalised right at the day to send the game into extra time, and then they wanted. So I'm Kath, you watched it, right? I'm assuming the family is gathered around the table.
Totally. I mean, I think anyone sort of more people watch the Euros or the World Cup, don't they, than necessarily support the kind of Premier League. And we know a lot of people watch the Premier League as well, but it's something different when it's your nation, isn't it? And I'm a big fan of Gareth Southgate. I think he's done an amazing job. I think he's a very enlightened leader. I think he's very good at shaping culture. You can see he's really under pressure. So there's something about this tournament that has seen the brilliant individuals yet to kind of click as a team. I feel really disappointed by the really negative kind of media and commentary that are just slating him and to some extent slating some of the footballers as well. And for me, I think it's really fascinating. What is it that makes a particular group of brilliant individuals click in this circumstance and not in this circumstance? What are the things? There are so many uncontrollables around a team just because of the individuals, what's happened to them through the year, what's happened to them in their career, their own personal circumstances, the relationships within the group, when, of course, it's always changing. Every tournament, you've got some older players and some younger ones coming in. So it's an ever-changing dynamic. And for me, I'm fascinated. So rather than just start writing the obituary of Gareth Southgate, I'm thinking, wow, isn't this interesting? We know he's a really skilled leader. We know he's delivered the best results we've had in my lifetime. So that's half a century. And he's struggling. Isn't that interesting? It shows you how difficult this is. It shows you how complex the alchemy is of getting a team to click. What are the things that aren't working? And, certainly I think one of the things he did bring in was a certain freedom that previous teams, the great individuals in the Beckham era, they never delivered as a team and they seemed to play under fear. And one of the things that felt Gareth Southgate freed them up in the recent tournaments when, last time round they got to the finals of the Euros, quarterfinals of the World Cup, I think semi-finals was it before that, was he seemed to give them a freedom. And now they've lost that again. And partly I think that is raised expectations because they've done so well under him. But for me, that's just fascinating, isn't it? Because, what can he do to create on this pressure cauldron a way of helping them just, come together and thrive? I was really struck by sort of Julian Nagelsmann, the German coach, who's also fairly new in. There've been some question marks over where the German team have been for some years. And he said, 30% of coaching is tactics, 70% is social competence. And so that's what we're watching. And we know that's complex, just as it's complex in all the organisations and workplaces we're in. So I really get tired of the quite hypocritical, uber-critical sort of media narrative that's a bit outdated. And I just want to be curious about what's going on. They obviously want to do well. They're obviously very impressive footballers at an incredible level. And yet, isn't it difficult?
Yeah, it is. I think let's just park the English media to one side. English media, when you're bad, they hate you. And when you're good, they love you. There's just no middle ground. And it's funny, I'm in the process of moving back to the UK and I'm not used to the adversarial nature of the media. Or I've forgotten what it was like living in Australia. It's just not like this at all. And so I think the media will see it as their job to poke holes in coaches that don't achieve, particularly when they've got a group of young players. I don't know much about Gareth Southgate. I don't know him. I know from people who do know him that he's a lovely fella. I know that he puts a lot of time, thought and effort into culture. So for that, he has my respect. I think what I've noticed as a fan and also as an observer of team culture is that his decision-making perhaps wasn't as quick as it should have been. So yesterday was a case in point. I think if I was managing a team and we were underperforming, and I always liken it back when I used to manage projects, is we had a deadline to hit and we absolutely had to hit that deadline sometimes you have to make the tough decisions, and I remember replacing personnel on projects because they just weren't delivering. And that's all I felt watching the game yesterday. I felt that he had the opportunity to change it. And I know he's a person that he likes to give players the responsibility to respond. And let's face it, he was saved by a moment of brilliance by one of England's best players in Jude Bellingham. And so I think that would be my only, not criticism, but my only, I suppose, observation is that he could have changed it earlier. And so I think some of the criticism that he's received for that is warranted. I mean, the English media like to go on the attack regardless.
I think he simply can't win because if the results were great, they go, oh, so good. He trusts the players.
That's right.
He gives the team time to kind of get into the game. He doesn't mess them around. And then when it isn't working, it's sort of, you've got to change it. I mean, he said himself, he was thinking of taking Jude Bellingham off. And he's the one that kind of brought that last kind of brilliant bicycle kick, life-saving goal. So it's such tiny margins. I think that the criticism suggests there is a right and a wrong. And with so many variables out on the pitch and literally a split second changes things, I mean, that's what makes the game interesting. That's why it's sport. Otherwise, we'd be able to predict they're a better team and so therefore they will win. It's because of that unpredictability that it's so compelling. And yet all the time we seem to be wanting to say, oh, that shouldn't be the case. We should be able to deliver X, Y, Z. So I think that the sort of commentary and the criticism it just doesn't really take account sometimes of the tiny margins of what makes a team not work is also what can make them brilliant. And it's just such a tiny shift, a tiny click, in a game where essentially it's a low scoring game. It's only one moment that could suddenly shift things, or a couple of moments, because of the way football is set up. It gives the underdog a chance. It makes it quite difficult to dominate. And we are at a level where all these teams are really good. They're playing for their countries. And we've actually seen Germany struggle in games. We've seen France struggle in games.
Italy
it's
are
not,
out.
There's no sort of acknowledgement. Yeah, Italy, who won last time. Yeah. So that also seems kind of odd to me. We should be celebrating, isn't it, how brilliant, it's such close margins. We're seeing the best at the top. Isn't it interesting how tight it is, how unpredictable it is? That's why it's so compelling. And yet that narrative just isn't played. There's some human right that England should be winning. They should be better. And if they're not, really get tired of commentary, really struggle with it, because I think it spoils the beauty of what sport represents. And it also stops us from getting curious about what is going on. Why is it so difficult for people we know are brilliant to actually deliver in this moment? That's the curious, that's the beauty of elite sport, is this kind of, you're right on the edge of trying to do something against incredibly high standard. And we're going to see the same thing in the Olympics and Paralympics. It's tiny margins.
So that's our group therapy session for the last night's England performance done.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, I read a paper by Cruikshanks and Collins called Culture Change in Elite Performance. And so it's specifically related to sports. And again, what we're trying to do here with this particular podcast is generate some curiosity around kind of culture. We're not trying to spoil it for you, by the way. All of a sudden you're going to, he didn't celebrate the goal. What does that say for culture? But here's some things that Cruikshanks and Collins found in their paper, right? And they found that high-performing cultures prevail when the shared perception and action of elite team environment members, and there's these four things. So sport supports sustained optimal performance, persists across time in the face of variable results. And that's what Kath was talking about there with regards to the England team, and leads to consistent high performance. Actually, it's 3 points, not 4, sorry. Leads to consistent high performance. And so when I read the paper, the nature of high performance is it's evolutionary. However, what you need to do is to create something that supports sustained optimal performance. So this is the foundational nature of culture. Now, one of the best examples for me recently was the Ryder Cup. And the Ryder Cup, if you're not familiar with it, is golf. And so they did a lot of work. Luke Donald was the captain, and they did a lot of work around culture before the tournament. And, and they attribute it to the success against the American team. I read a really great interview with Rory McIlroy, who's one of Europe's best golfers. And he talked about the fact that the team was one of the best he's ever played on, even though golf is quite an individual performance, an individual sport. Yes, that you're paired with other people, but it's quite individual. And he said one of the best bits of it, he said it was such a laugh with the other players. He said every night they used to have a dad joke left on the pillow, and then they had to come and share their dad joke the next morning or whenever it was. And he gave an example of one. If you're an American in the living room, what are you in the bathroom? And the answer is European. And so he said, it's little, he said, it's a dad joke, he said, but it's little things like that all helped to build the team spirit. Now, Kath, you're someone who's performed in elite performance, obviously, at the Olympics. So I'm really interested in kind of your take on what you've seen. Has it changed over the years? I mean, we were talking just off camera about the way that medal winners are treated differently. So I think they'd be great stories to share with listeners.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about Luke Donald and that European Ryder Cup team is they work with Owen Eastwood, who is a brilliant performance coach who puts huge, and who Gareth Southgate in the England team formerly worked with. And his whole approach is one of connection between athletes on a team and connecting them all to a greater purpose, like beyond winning. Why does winning matter? What does it represent? And actually going briefly back to the England team, what I read the other day is they don't have a psychologist with them, and they work with inspirational people from Pippa Grange to Owen Eastwood. And so I'm also thinking, hang on, there's been a really powerful part of the recipe that feels like it hasn't been invested in much. And I do wonder if that is part of what's going on. And that approach is about being part of a story as well. And that's how sort of Southgate was starting to reframe what it meant to play for England, and therefore free the players up, which again, that we're not seeing. And what Luke Donald was able to do was to create the conditions for these individuals to now feel part of a team. What does it mean? There's actually a beautiful YouTube video. It's just 3 minutes. We'll put the link to it, where Luke Donald takes you around the behind the scenes, how it's set up for them. There's nothing about winning on the walls. There are pictures of shared moments when they've come together in practice or in previous occasions in previous Ryder Cups, European team moments. So it's all of, a team hugging at the end, or a couple of players playing together. And they have these pictures of Seve Ballesteros, who's a bit of a hero, and their representation of what it means to be a Ryder Cup player. And they have a wall with all the people who've ever played for the European Ryder Cup, that you're coming into this. So it's creating that sense of what you come into. And that is now something that across sport, lots of teams start to do. There's this, when the athletes went to collect their team kit, Adidas, and you go, now that's a big event. We used to sort of turn up and you just, in a warehouse, pick up your kit. You get like literally a couple of suitcases full of T-shirts and your opening ceremony uniform, your closing ceremony uniform, and your shorts and underwear and a top and a vest top and a bra top and, you name it. Lots of stuff. It's a lovely part. It's a real privilege. But now they've turned that into a really special moment. So the athletes they go on a journey, and the walls, we were just in a warehouse, nothing really on the walls, maybe a couple of posters or something. But now it's you're part of this story, and they have sort of athletes from the past, you're part of what's going to happen next. And then there'll be a story kind of beyond you. So you feel that you're part of this ongoing story of Team GB, and you're going to have your moment to play your contribution. But you're not just an athlete on your own now. You're part of something bigger. And that's something that's been built out, each time by the British Olympic Association, working with all of the sports to try and make it as somewhere you feel at home, somewhere you feel you belong. So they always get into the Olympic Village ahead of the athletes arriving and troubleshoot. They take their own team of plumbers when they're in Rio. What might the problems be? Bed quality, mattresses, size of mattresses for your rowers and your basketball players. They think of all of these issues that have come up in the past, and they get in there ahead of time and sort them out. And in fact, there was a problem with plumbing in Rio. The Brits had sorted their stuff out, and the Australians actually had to go and stay in hotels for a few days before they could come into the village. I mean, that's just disruption. And at a time of immense pressure, you want to minimise those disruptions that can really throw you off when you've got enough nerves kind of flooded around the system. So there is a much greater emphasis on trying to create an experience in which an athlete is most likely to be able to go out there and give their absolute best performance and feel part of something bigger than themselves. Within each sports, then there are, sometimes there's a kind of shared team feeling as well. Like the rowing team will do their thing. And, you sort of connect. It, looks a little bit different than in different teams. And one of the things that I hated, that I hope they don't do anymore, in fact, they won't do this year because no one's getting on a plane, they're getting on the Eurostar, was we used to have this thing that you all go out together sort of on the plane, just, mixed up. And then you come back, the medalists are in the first class and all the rest are in the back. And that's a real sort of sense somehow of being devalued, I think. Of course, we celebrate the medal winners, they've done brilliantly. But do you know what? Sometimes there's incredible performances that are done by other people who are in an event where the world record was broken or where they've overcome some incredible adversity and they've actually performed out of their skins. And it's somehow we just sort of devalue that because it didn't come with a medal. And actually when you arrive then at Heathrow, one of the things you don't see on TV, but if you sort of zoomed back behind the cameras are sort of at the front steps seeing the medalists come off and they take a picture. Meanwhile, the rest of the plane is kind of coming out the back steps and then walking behind the journalists taking those photos, feeling a bit kind of like nobody cares about us. It doesn't matter. We've failed. And I think we don't need to, we don't need to sort of add that into rub salt into people's wounds. Of course, the whole system is set up that not everybody can win a medal. What we want is to celebrate the stories, celebrate everyone who's had, their best performance. And do you know what? Luck plays a role in this. Luck will fall well for some and less for others. There will be so many external factors you can't control in an event. That's what makes sports so interesting. So I think it's important that we don't have a sense of you personally are worth more as a human being because you won a medal and you didn't. The strategy has shifted to talking about winning well rather than just winning. Like we don't want winning at all costs, but there's still a lot of murkiness about what that really means. And there's still a lot of funding decisions that are made on the basis of medals. So I think sports is still really trying to find its way. What I think we should be looking for is the broader stories this summer in the Olympics. So look at actually what athletes have gone through to get to where they are. And, what's the story they're going to leave with from this Olympics and Paralympics? Not just the medal. There's actually a human story behind it. We can often learn a lot more from.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to meet and listen to Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal manager, speak a few weeks ago, actually. And he talked about the importance of creating and instilling in a team a performance culture. And he strikes me as someone who's always been ahead of his time. He fundamentally changed English football with his real focus on diet and playing style and fitness, and he said back then He said, I was able to influence players. I was able to influence the club as a whole. He said, but it's not like that. So it's up to me to change, not to expect the world to change around me. And he said, performance culture for him is one where the players turn up with their own story, share that, and then ask, well, how can I get better with the people around me? How can I achieve my full potential? And what changes do I need to make to get there? And so he outlined that in his biography, My Life in Red and White, and he shared that. And I really like that distinction. Staying with football, Manchester United were one of the kind of the most successful football teams in recent memory. And Alex Ferguson had a very strict performance culture. And people often think that he was this hard Glaswegian and there was that edge to him. But if you listen to Phil Neville, who's an ex-Man United player, talk about him, he said he was highly emotionally intelligent. He really took the time to build a relationship with players. And Steve McLaren, the ex-assistant manager, he said that, in an interview, he said, at some clubs you get players who think they've made it either because of a big transfer fee or they're highly talented. He said, but at Manchester United, he said, the manager and the other players would not stand for that. And I think that for me is what a kind of high performance kind of looks like. And you see this play out, the Chicago Bulls, also a great example, but that really stemmed from the manager who's written a great book called 11 Rings, Phil Jackson. And every year he used to build the culture of the team first. He used to buy each player a book that he thought they would enjoy. And then they all had to come back and talk about what they learned from the book. And the team set their own principles. But individually, they had to be good, but also they had to work well as a team as well. And that's something that you saw on the court. That's something you see on the pitch, where you don't need just one captain. You need a team of captains who take responsibility at the right time. You can't have everyone as captain at the same time.
I like that sense of focusing in on that character piece, on who are we as people. And for me, I just find that fascinating. Particularly when athletes are, when the competition isn't going their way, and, same for the England team, I'm fascinated. How do they manage that? What are they thinking? What do they go back to? What behaviours come out at that point? I mean, one of the sort of interesting developing stories from the Euros is the Spanish team, who seem to be firing on all cylinders, really impressive. So, again, I'm thinking, what's going on there? And a colleague and consultant in the culture space, Jamie McPherson, a friend of mine, he was sort of been doing some research about Luis de la Fuente, who's the coach of the Spanish team. And he, interestingly, hasn't managed a big club, but has come up managing the juniors, the under-19s team that won in 2015, the under-21s that won in 2019. So he knows a lot of these players really well. And he has a really clear philosophy. And his philosophy is that a player's character and values are as important as form and talent. And he says, what surprises me is that it seems exceptional, something that we should consider as natural. I prefer to work with good people. Of course, great professionals, but also good people. He talks about this, that, he wants a great group of people, a great human group. So I love this. It plays to my approach to, focusing much more holistically on how, sport is a mechanism for developing who we are together rather than a mechanism purely for winning a medal. Only one team can do that, but actually all of the teams can explore collectively what they're capable of and test themselves under pressure. And that's the beauty of the setting. And so I think having a coach like that sounds really quite inspirational. And I think it's been impressive to see the impact of that. I mean, interestingly, Southgate started off with that coming out of doing very well with junior teams as well. And that created some continuity and a sense of a common culture that these players were meeting at a younger age. And so you know what it means to be part of the England team, or in this case with Luis de la Fuente, you know what it means to be part of the Spanish team. And I do think that's so powerful, but it's not something you can sort of suddenly fix. Like if something isn't going well and again, you can't sort of in 2 days sort of suddenly change that. And that's the challenge, that culture is an infinite project, or I'm not sure if project's the right word. It's infinitely evolving, as we often talk about. And then it's put into this finite competitive situation. And of course, that's the challenge, isn't it? To sort of, if something isn't right in the culture, I can't necessarily change it. We have to think sort of longer term. So I think it's attracting some different coaching talent now into it, more thoughtful people like Arsene Wenger, like Gareth Southgate, like Luis de la Fuente. And I think that also could apply into our workplaces, where we might think about how are we developing people in the workplace? Who are we becoming in the course of delivering this month's targets or this annual goal that we've been set? And I encourage leaders and managers to see that responsibility and opportunity to help people become better versions of themselves in the course of being part of your team and pursuing the goals that you're pursuing. Because I think that's where we humanize the cultures we're in. That's where it gets really, there's a bigger prize, a bigger opportunity, a bigger experience we can have and create in the environments that we're in.
And I think it's important to remember all of the research. So Anderson, 2011, Crane and Bird, 2005, Quested and Duda, 2010, all points to the fact that defined group culture significantly shapes member cognition, member behavior, member development, member well-being, and member performance. And as Kath rightly says, if it's going wrong, you can't just be like, right, let's just bring everyone together. One of the classic mistakes often that I read about is when players go on these SAS training camps, and we think that will immediately change performance. Now, those things only help when the culture has already been defined. They don't actually define the culture in and of itself. And this is why Luke Donald, prior to the Ryder Cup, brought the team together. Pre-season is the perfect opportunity for football teams or baseball teams, whatever your sport is. It's the perfect time to define culture, just like Phil Jackson did for the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers. So you can't immediately fix it, but what you can do is create the foundations ahead of time such that when you need it, you can refer people back to what the agreement was, such that you generate that accountability all over again.
I think there's going to be a really interesting thing with the Olympics this summer. We've got some really new events coming, or some events have just been in one Olympics and they're still sort of evolving. So you get some events that have been in, literally centuries. And now we've got breaking, we've got skateboarding, we've got sport climbing, we've got surfing that's actually out in Tahiti in French Polynesia. And I think they often have quite different cultures from the more traditional sports that have been in for, decades or centuries. And I find that interesting to watch, to think also, from one sport to another, how does a culture shift because of the history? Because of, the sort of traditions you might bring. And these are sports that haven't been shaped by being part of the Olympics, that often have not been shaped by winning medals at all. You see that with the Winter Olympics, some of those kind of the crazy, extreme, the ones where they're doing tricks and all of that. I can't remember what they're called now. And some of those sort of, ski boarding. Oh my goodness, I've lost it. Snowboarding, that's it. Yeah. You can tell I'm not a winter sports person. You can sort of see how they come from a culture where, like, taking a risk is what the sport is about. And it's better to have a go at something that's never been done before and risk winning the medal. It's better, though, to do that. That's what the sport is about. And they're cheering each other on and they're going, wow, it's amazing you attempted that, whether you land it or not. And it'd be interesting to see over time whether that sort of shifts, whether the medals start to kind of creep in on their culture. But I often find some of those newer, younger sports have a really healthy perspective. I was listening recently to Sky Brown, the kind of incredible British skateboarder who won a medal in Tokyo. And they were involved in qualifying. She'd actually qualified and had a bit of an injury she was managing recently, but she went to do a competition to help her friend who's competing for Japan to qualify, because she wanted to make sure her friend was there. And I thought it was so interesting because it goes against this whole narrative of, my goodness, you're helping another country. What is going on? But she's her friend. They train together. And I love that sometimes, this sort of spirit of, actually we are part of something bigger. The sport that we do, that's bigger. And that lasts well beyond, that community is there for me the rest of my life. That lasts beyond 3 minutes on the podium. Sure, we want to compete for that. We're happy to do that. We're competitive animals. But actually it's the community and this shared endeavour that comes first. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look out for with some of these new sports. How does the culture differ from some of the more traditional ones?
So, again, it's another podcast where I feel like I just keep talking. One final thing I will mention, because one of my friends once bemoaned the fact that he was watching a cricket match and he said, why do they slap hands after every delivery? Why is it a high five after every delivery? And that's an example of how the culture has shifted. Same with tennis. when you see the doubles, they, slap hands, little low five, whatever you want to call it. Again, all of these little dynamics, it's a real sign of how culture has really changed, and a demonstration, and Kath mentioned it just now, of just how important connection is to the younger athletes, the younger sports, people who've been brought up to expect different. And so it's fascinating. So let's talk about the
do you know, actually, just coming on that, there was some research, I think it was in beach volleyball, could have been basketball, and I think it was beach volleyball, where they kind of clap hands in between, and they looked at the results of how often people were sort of high-fiving and connecting, and how they did performance-wise. And the teams that had greater connection, more hand slaps, did better.
Wow. Okay, we will dig them.
Yeah, we'll try and look that out. Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be a really good one to share. All right, what are our 3 takeaways, Kath?
So, actions. So it's a lovely one. Listen, observe, listen carefully to what the athletes and the teams talk about beyond the result. Yeah, so they're going to go, yeah, we're happy we won, or we're disappointed we didn't win. But then listen to what comes next. Listen carefully to what they talk about, because that gives you a sense of what they really value and their character and how they're approaching it.
All right, so one thing to get curious about is look beyond the result. What do you notice about the team dynamics? Who's celebrating with who? How are they hand slapping? What are you seeing around the personalities? I always look out for those little interactions. How are people motivating each other? How are they holding each other to account? What do you notice about the culture from what you see in front of you? And then lastly, Kath, what should we want people to uncover?
Yeah, so, building on that further, what are the ways in which athletes and sports teams have developed their norms that are underpinning their performance? So what can you notice? What can you sort of uncover reading between the lines or listening between what they say in interviews and things about how have they got to this place where they're able to bring their best performance under pressure? So what have they done to do that? Because often they will tell you that, but it might not be the thing the journalist or the interviewer is focusing on. But uncover the ways in which athletes and sports teams have developed behavioural norms, values that underpin performance.
So what we've just done there is ruin sport for everybody. So when they
we've deepened it. We've deepened your experience. We've enriched this summer of a sport. It's official. You can spend time watching and studying it.
So get your notebooks out for England's next game, as well as your scarf. All right, Kath, great to talk about this fabulous subject. Thank you.
Brilliant. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's Inside Out Culture podcast.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and of course, share with others who you think may be interested.